What's going on, y'all? Shout out to the LDPC. It's your boy Fight Critic here to give you guys another SuckaPunch Podcast, Volume 2, Episode 2. Uh, the man of the hour was going to be Eddie Hearn. If you haven't heard the news today, he left Sky Sports to expand DAZN. There's not really a confirmed figure on what the expansion looks like, but word is it's somewhere in the nine-figure range. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. We also going to touch on some football. Not American football, but some football. Just a lot of things that have been happening this week. But most importantly, let's talk a little bit about something that has been addressed but needs to be continually addressed. And that is the Derek Chauvin trial for the murder of George Floyd. And I feel comfortable now saying that this trial was for the murder of George Floyd. Because this is something, and I'll put it to you like this. I believe in the last 10 or 15 years, there have been 15,000 deaths that the police themselves have committed. And I think only 4 officers have actually been sentenced for it. And I wanted to take out my calculator to kind of do some math real quick. So 4 divided by 15,000. So that is a 0.027% of a chance that if you are a police officer and you kill a civilian, that you will serve any jail time or be convicted, I should say. Not even jail time, but convicted. And the states usually end up having to shell out money to the families affected by these wrongful deaths as a way to compensate them because they know that they don't want to put themselves in the position to have to be subject to investigation over the way that they handle their law enforcement like officers. And following yesterday's verdict, today the Attorney General Merrick Garland announced that the government, the Department of Justice, will be investigating the Minnesota Police Force, and honestly, is very long overdue. I think this is something that the Obama administration completely dropped the ball on because these killings were still kind of going on during the during the Obama administration. The Trump administration did not give a fuck about any of this, but with the Biden administration, and even for the most part, I don't have much of any care for what the Biden administration has been doing so far, mostly because, I mean, it's the standard shit government that we've been dealing with. But I've always have to tell people that my reasons for me not wanting Donald Trump in office was deliberately for how Donald Trump was treating states like my state. So the fact that when you look at the amount of money that my state gives to the federal government, we give the most money in the United States, or is somewhere in the top 3. And our state generates a shit ton of money, and we barely see any of it back. We are actually one of the lowest donor states. So Donald Trump getting out of office also allowed our states to continue to actually investigate him for the state crimes that he's committed. And I hope at some point during the spring or even early summer, we start to see some things roll out. Donald Trump and his administration had tried really hard to stifle this investigation. So I'm happy that, it's given a lot of air has been cleared. He's not in office. He can't hide behind his presidency. But with Merrick Garland, going in and actually saying that we're going to investigate this, I think it's important. I think a lot of people need to pay attention to it. But I also think he shouldn't just stop there. I think you need to do this around the entire country, especially when you got the FBI who released a study 10 years ago that white supremacy was very, very real in the police department. And I don't think you needed that study. I think you could have easily just found different parts of history where the police department was rooted with white supremacists. And it's very much a rampant thing today. Even in states like New York, the NYPD is extremely rampant with white supremacists. But with the Derek Chauvin situation, we had to watch a man lose his life for 9 minutes and 46 seconds. And we had to sit through this trial where you had witnesses, you had brave young women, especially the young woman who actually recorded the entire situation. You know, I'm almost fearful for her life, because the same situation that happened with Amber Geiger, and the witness that testified against her, he died 10 days later. Like, he was killed. And I feel so horrible that this young woman is going to go the rest of her life having to look over her shoulder. But for something like her, I give her also the same amount of respect for being as brave as she was, to be willing to actually not only continue to do what she did that day, but also to speak on it. You had the store clerk who didn't want to call the police officer because of the counterfeit $20 bill that he suspected George Floyd gave him. And he was willing to eat that cost as part of his paycheck. And he had to testify. Then you had members of the police force that testified against Derek Chauvin. Then you had doctors, people who specialize in specific fields, those who specialize in breathing, that had to testify against him. So there's all these things kind of mashed up into one trial. And you still had people who, for the life of them, couldn't understand that putting your knee on somebody's neck on the ground can ruin the ability for them to breathe. And it wasn't the fact that these people strongly believed that George Floyd having fentanyl in his system was the cause of it. It was mostly because they would do anything in their power not to put the police department in this country and their respective states accountable for doing fuck shit. And that was a huge issue. And Chauvin was found guilty on 3 counts, and he is subject to, I think, somewhere between 45 and 65 years. Most likely, Chauvin is going to spend the rest of his life in prison because he knowingly did this. It's one thing if you're on a guy for like 10 seconds to a minute. This guy was legitimately on his motherfucker's neck for like 9 minutes and 46 seconds. That's a problem. And for me, just seeing the fact that as we shut one door, we now have to worry about all the others, because most people think that this is some poetic justice or some victory. No, all this shit is nothing but shit that needs to start adding up. And it needs to be held accountable. I want every time a police officer wrongly pulls his trigger to be fearful that he was going to spend time in jail. I want to end qualified immunity. I want guys to knowingly know that when you put on that badge and you step out in the streets in order to protect people, that you know that the minute you do something wrong, there is no more chances. If I go to my job and I accidentally assault somebody, I can't say that this was an accident and you should keep me hired. If I go outside and I accidentally beat somebody up, I'm being subject to the utmost of the law. Police officers should not be any different. If you do something wrong, you should be able to face a judge and a jury and to be sentenced. It's how it goes. It goes for every individual. There are more restrictions that are placed on private citizens than the public servants who know the law and have to respect it. So this isn't some sort of poetic justice, or this isn't some revelation or some breakthrough. No, this is just a long line of things that need to happen more often. And until they start happening more often, then people are not going to be satisfied with these things. And that means that Kim Potter is next, the McMichaels are next, and all the rest of the officers that were in the situation with George Floyd are next. Send them all to jail. And I feel bad for the young woman who was shot 4 times yesterday because she was defending herself in a state where stand your ground is legal, and she was able lawfully to defend herself with a knife from being jumped by girls in her school, and a police officer put 4 bullets in her chest. Not mentioning the fact that she was the one who called the police because she was fearful for her life. And as somebody like myself who lives in a big city, and I've run into trouble very infrequently, but when I've had situations I've been able to dodge. I've had situations where I wasn't able to dodge. But the one thing I could tell you is everybody that's from a big city, like especially if they're a black or a brown kid, at some point in your life, you either were almost subject to getting jumped, or you've been jumped, or any combination of the two. And for people like me, I've never been, I wouldn't say jump, because when I think about jump, it means that, you just get fucked up. But I have been caught. I have been caught and I have been robbed. And that shit that happens to you as a teenager, that stuff sticks with you for the rest of your life. You never want to get caught lacking again. And what's the first thing that you do? You think about how you can protect yourself. And I remember being that teenager and losing material items because I got caught. And the first thing I said was, start carrying a knife on me. And I did that for 6 months. That was a way for me to know that whoever came by the next time, you was going to have to earn it. So when she's carrying a knife on her, she's calling up the police to help her, and she's being jumped. There's a good chance that them girls jumped her before, and she has to protect herself, and that the people that are around her have not listened to her. And that's usually the case. Like, I know with guys, like, we gonna ask for our homies, and ultimately the situation that happened with me was, regardless if I was carrying a knife, I went to one of the homies. I went to one of the homies that knew everything in the area, and we knew exactly who it was. But for me, I had to realize at the same time, I let him handle it instead of me. Why? Because in this area, like, I don't need anything happening to my family. I don't need that sort of pressure to know that if I start something, that my mother could be affected, my father could be affected. So no, I let the homies handle it, and they handled it quite well. That's just what you do. Certain dudes are always going to be willing to do that. So when I see the situation that happened to her, it lets me know that everybody around her let her down. They weren't listening to her. Her friends let her down. Her family let her down. Because we don't rush to the police. It's just not something that a lot of us do. We rush to the people that we know that can help us. And it just seems like she didn't have any help. And the last resort put 4 shots in her chest. And I hope that police officer, and I hope the girls that were bothering her, I hope they too are subject to this. And I know it's wrong for me to say that because ultimately these are children. But at the end of the day, going about the way of trying to get somebody jumped and knowing that in any sort of realization to this, something could have went wrong and she could have died, and something did happen that way. And that's got to live on your guilty conscience that you knowingly took this path, knowing that anything could happen in the moment. And you should be able to face that punishment, in my opinion. So, for Derek Chauvin, you get to go to jail, hopefully for the rest of your life, and then afterwards you get to meet the likes of Christopher Columbus and Ronald Reagan, because you are definitely going to burn when you are gone. And I hope you burn. Next, let's talk a little about some football, man. I haven't talked about some football in years on this channel. And just to kind of give you guys a little bit of background, I not only played football growing up, but I also watched it very, very diligently, even more than boxing at one point. Leaving like my late teens into my early 20s, just until I started to work a lot of these jobs in which I couldn't really watch games anymore. But when I was younger, I used to always watch the games and watch the sport as a total, keep track on players. I think the thing that kind of pissed me off was the fact that FIFA just got progressively worse after 2014. And that should let you know how good of a fan I am, because if I'm telling you that the last best FIFA was FIFA 14, then you know I'm legit about it. But this situation that happened over the weekend, the European Super League and UEFA. So, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't like UEFA. I don't like FIFA. I don't like them because they are the biggest pieces of shit in the sport. even more so than any team, any owner, any broadcaster, any pundit, anything. They are the biggest pieces of shit. They have knowingly money laundered. They have knowingly taken deals under the table. They have knowingly rigged their system. They have knowingly robbed the teams and the players and the fans. And every time we find ourselves in a situation where we could bring about real change, UEFA leverages the players, the coaches, and most importantly, the fans in order to keep their way. And on Sunday, there was a press release from the 16 major the 12 to 16 major clubs in the world from different parts and different regions, and they basically said, hey, we are forming a super league amongst us so that this way we can put on games and matches between us. It will start at the beginning of August, and the founders would be able to collect on a specific amount of money. Now, the total pool of money would be $3.5 billion, and this was set to begin in 2023. $3.5 billion among 16 teams is a massive amount of money, much more than what any of those teams are going to get. And, if you divide it up by evenly what they would get in a year with UEFA. And they said, hey, we are the biggest breadwinners in this sport, and we do not feel like we should be giving the lion's share of our profits to UEFA. We don't trust them. We don't like them. We don't like the way that they're not, even and accessible with the financial fair play. They don't regulate properly. They don't do shit properly. But most importantly, we have to spend so much money to be competitive that we don't even see that money get earned back in most of the situations. And COVID was a real realization for them that UEFA didn't give a fuck about them during this pandemic. So they said, hey, we are the biggest breadwinners in the game. Let's form this super league so that this way we can show everybody, and I'm speaking from the way that I saw it, we could show everybody what we can do in generating money outside of UEFA. And for many of the players in the teams that were not involved, they got immediately upset because they allowed themselves to be absolutely bamboozled, hoodwinked, and led astray by UEFA. And that's the way that I see it. Because the minute that happened, UEFA released a statement and got the leagues involved. And when they got the leagues involved, they said that these teams were being greedy and that they should be banned from competing. Now, when I heard all of that, in my head I was just like, you can't ban these guys. You need these guys to make money. So at first I was just like, all right, let's see what happens. Because if you ban them, you're ultimately saying that you are risking not profiting off of these teams that are highly profitable. And that they were ready to ban teams from all the competitions. These teams wouldn't get to play domestic games. They even got fucking FIFA involved. And FIFA was ready to ban them from playing in the World Cup for being greedy. Even though there's a fucking World Cup during the winter in Qatar. Yeah. But nonetheless, UEFA kind of sparked fans to start protesting outside the stadiums. Like every major club in England, the Big Six, had protesters outside. You had pundits on Sky Sports. You had Gary Neville, that dumbass, now that you look at everything in hindsight, spilling out his guts while he knows that his employer, Sky Sports, is also at fucking fault for this. And ultimately, in the end, I believe it was on Monday or Tuesday. It was Monday, I think. Yeah, it was Monday. You saw teams in England pull out of the European Super League. Like, they just moved out. And a lot of the fans were just like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so proud of my club that they went back. Yes, they do deserve some sort of punishment, but at the same time, I'm happy that they're not doing this. There's no reason why we should let them compete in this league. There's no relegation, there's no promotion, there's no inclusion for everybody, and X, Y, and Z. And then it leaks. Not too long after that, UEFA really just cut them a deal. and got them back in the league. And the very same fans that were just like, oh my gosh, my team and how they feel about me and they care about the sport and X, Y, and Z, all of a sudden it's, well, they deserve the money, they deserve the money and, they get to do this and that. And you guys really have a fucked up way of hiding your selfishness because of it. And for me as a fan of it, I saw this a mile away. And I told people on Twitter, I said, hey, UEFA's playing y'all because this European Super League had absolutely no intention on not playing games and not playing domestic games or cup games or playing in the Champions League. They said, yo, we just want to play some showcase matches, sell the TV rights, make a bunch of money, and kind of show people like, hey, you don't need UEFA to do all this shit. But UEFA got mad at. Why did UEFA get mad at them? Because UEFA wasn't getting any of the money, my friend. That's really what it came down to. If the Super League went to UEFA and says, hey, we'll cut you a check, UEFA would have went with it. You know that. I know that. Let's not be naive about this. You're talking about an organization that was taking bribes from Michel Platini for how many decades? Yeah. So when UEFA decided to buy back the teams, because that's what they did, they bought them back physically and monetarily, they released this new format to the Champions League. Oh, look at this. Perfect timing. Everybody's excited. Everybody hates the European Super League. Let's go ahead and just release our format, which is basically the Super League on steroids. And that's what they did. So this new league, well, this new format, I should say, in the league, expands the competition from 32 to 36. It also means that more teams in England can qualify because, of course, they had to cut the check to the Big Six. So now you got to make more people available for the cup. So with doing that, they also introduced and I'm putting air quotes around this, merit system. And they call it coefficiency is the word they're using. They're calling it coefficiency or coefficiency, whatever the fuck you want to call it. I like coefficiency. So when they talked about this coefficiency, they then were like, oh, it's coefficiency. So you know what that means to me? That just means loopholes. And I started digging into the details. And I was like, aha, found something that's real fucked up about this. And what I found out was, let's say you are a supporter of Aston Villa. And Aston Villa, of course, isn't a club that makes the Champions League. There are some times that Villa has tried really hard and they've kind of finished in that 6, 7, 8 slot. But with now an expansion to Champions League that allows more English teams to get in, let's just hypothetically say that Aston Villa finishes 5th one year. So they're not guaranteed a spot, but they finish 5th. And normally, if you are the top 3 in the current format, you are guaranteed a spot, and then the 4th place winner has to go through a playoff system to qualify for the group stage next year. But because that group stage is getting basically thrown out the window, and this is restructured for coefficiency, if Villa finish 5th, but let's say a team like United finish 8th, the coefficiency would trigger the team that has had more Champions League success to qualify for the Champions League, and the team above them would go to the Europa League, which is the silver medal of this shit. And for a lot of people, they haven't wrapped their heads around it, and they're starting to realize that, oh my gosh, this is absolutely bullshit. This is bullshit. And yeah, you guys got fucking hoodwinked. You guys got bamboozled and led astray. And you let UEFA play with your emotions in order to get their way. Had you just stood your fucking ground, you would have still kept the same Champions League format, and you would have had extra fucking games to watch of bigger teams. They would have still played in your league. Do you honestly believe that this European Super League of 16 teams, that these teams could run themselves financially without needing to play in the league, in the cup, in the Champions League? No! This was an opportunity for them to show everybody that you don't need to be dictated by UEFA. And they were willing to have conversations about opening and expansion it as time went on. Do I think that the rollout of it was great? Absolutely not. I don't think the rollout of it was great. But what I do believe is I do believe that something like this was absolutely necessary. And it was necessary because of a couple things. Number one, I truthfully believe that whatever it is you make, you should be able to keep a large portion of it. There's no reason why. Oh, Safari, close. There should be no reason why I make a ton of money generating shit and I only get to keep a small percentage of it. That's bullshit. That's like shit that happens in the music industry. That's shit that happens in boxing that pisses me off. And that's what UEFA runs with football in Europe. It's bullshit. And all these fans, they're suddenly like, oh, well, it's bad, but it's not European Super League bad. Like, no, you guys got God. You guys are not going to be protesting outside the stadium because of this. You're not going to see Gary Neville on Sky Sports talking about how fucked up this is. He ain't going to say that. In fact, I give a ton of credit to Antonio Conte, who basically came out and said, yo, UEFA is fucked. And to make matters kind of worse for a lot of people, just to kind of just give you guys some perspective, but all this sort of, oh, the fans won. Dog, them same American billionaires that you hate that run your teams in England, dog, they won. They got paid to come back. So y'all didn't win shit. This shit was never about you guys. This shit was about money. And they played you. UEFA played you for a fool so badly. It's almost hilarious how much they played you. And in 10 and 15 years from now, when you're watching some small mid-level clubs, they finish, 5th or 6th, and you're like, yeah, the Champions League. And then somebody like Arsenal finishes like 7th and 8th. Good luck. That is going to be that's going to be hellfire, bro, for a lot of people who are on this talking about it's integrity, it's about the sport. Dude, you could have just had your European Super League, had a couple extra games to watch for the week, could have still had you guys in the game. But nah, you thought that these 16 teams wanted to overhaul the entire system because you believed UEFA and you let UEFA dictate you. And now you get to spend more money watching this game. But speaking about money and speaking about Sky Sports, the man of the hour himself, Edward Hearns. Now, today it was reported that Edward struck a deal to complete his contract with Sky Sports, let it expire, and then he would be jumping right into DAZN for the UK. Now, obviously, DAZN is in the UK, but it ain't shit, so it needs shit. So they figured, hey, let's kind of get Hearn to go over to the UK, because DAZN, while it's okay in the United States, let's just be honest about it. It hasn't done what it was wanted to do. It didn't create this massive takeover that people expected it to happen. Like, there's still fighters that are just like, dog, there's nothing there for me, And you're still not, and for as much as like a lot of people like they want to praise it, just because of the other people that are involved in the sport in the U.S., it hasn't, in my opinion, been consistent in delivering what it needs to deliver. You had 4 middleweight champions, and you still couldn't get an undisputed middleweight champion. I don't know how that doesn't happen, But Eddie Hearn now leaves Sky Sports and is looking to build out the DAZN platform in the UK. And I think he can have a lot more success building out the platform in the UK versus the US because he has a lot more dick suckers in the UK. So a lot of those guys are just going to be like, oh my gosh, I can cancel Sky Sports, which they were probably only using to watch boxing because I believe BTN has a lot of the rights to a lot of soccer matches. So, excuse me for showing my American football matches. But for a lot of those guys, they can just like leave. They don't have to worry about paying. Sky pay-per-view anymore, and they're just like they could jump on a subscription, and the subscription there is super fucking cheap. It's like $2, I think. But don't expect that $2 to stay $2. Is all I'm saying. But they gave him what was rumored to be like a 9-figure deal that'll be for a significant period of time. And this happens a day after Hearn became the chairman of the board for Matchroom. So he took over his father's place, and he's now running the entire company as a whole. So with great power comes great responsibility and even more of a lens to fuck up. For Eddie Hearn, he now has to delegate 2 different continents and how he builds talent. I don't think he's going to have much of an issue in the UK for a multitude of reasons. I think he's going to have more freedom in the UK with DAZN just because of the fact that he's done a ton of business there. He understands that market a lot better there. He really hasn't really understood the market here in the US. I think we can all collectively say that he hasn't done that yet. But with this new DAZN deal, there are 2 things that are very, very interesting to it for me. The first one is Anthony Joshua is off limits. That means that he is not exclusive to DAZN. And if I was Anthony Joshua, I wouldn't want to make myself exclusive to DAZN. Just saying. If I'm fighting and if I'm the biggest draw that you've got in your stable, everybody should bid for me. I shouldn't have to be locked into a situation because you went and signed off on the contract. Why? Because that's when you get situations like Canelo Alvarez. So with that happening, Joshua's off the table. He will essentially be a guy who, if Hearn makes a fight, he has to offer the fight to Sky Sports, DAZN, and other people as well. And then you have the second big thing, and I think this is the crucial thing, is what is the financial structure going to look like? Because $2 a month, he's not going to put fights on for $2 a month. Let's just be honest about it. The pound is more expensive. He's going to have to raise the price of it. And considering the fact that I think Sky is somewhere around the 40 to 50 pound mark, which is very expensive to pay for a channel, this has got to be in some capacity, some way that he has to compete with it. Now, I do expect something in which you're going to see a lot of the same model structure that happens here in the United States. I think what he's going to do is he's going to raise the subscription, probably somewhere between 8 to 10 pounds, to allow people to get in. So he might just let them get in at that price, or he may just give a grandfathered in period to the $2 people. And that grandfather period will probably end at some point because it ended here in the US when he did it. So I think he'll do that, and then he's going to have opportunities where if his fights he would normally put on Sky pay-per-view, he's going to charge you guys extra for those fights anyway. So yeah, this is really interesting, but it also, I think it's also going to make Eddie Hearn a lot more competitive in the UK, and for a lot of reasons. One of the biggest things to this is that Sky Sports is going to lose a decent chunk of revenue. I can't say it's a large chunk of revenue because boxing is just not a large chunk of revenue, but a decent chunk of revenue. And how do they combat this is important. How do they go about future fights is going to be important. Are they going to wait and see what his model structure looks like and what he's going to charge people is very important. But also, and something that a lot of people need to also realize, especially when it comes to financials and shit like this, is that ultimately, in what is Eddie Hearn going to spend his money on for this? Because we saw him blow through a shit ton of money in the United States, and then at one point, DAZN was on essentially the verge of going under. Especially in the United States, the fact that in a year this thing was getting ready to just absolutely blow up before you had new people take over. And for Hearn to blow through the budget that he blew through in the United States in such a relatively quick fashion, and DAZN still has to recoup a shit ton of money back from a lot of the shit that happened. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens. So how does he approach the UK is my biggest concern, because ultimately, again, if he does the same thing he did the US and the UK, he's not going to be successful. If he goes in and he blows through endless millions of dollars to put on fights that can't make that money back, which is what happened here in the U.S., then he's going to be in the same situation, you know? So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I personally feel like Sky Sports is going to go hard at him, once he starts to put on shows. And I think you're going to see it based off how aggressively that they're going to look to replace him with somebody. And I think it might be Frank Warren. But I think you're going to see that happen. Or, good old Daniel Killahan's team might even see an opportunity to make some money. But yeah, I think there's a lot of things that need to be obviously like brought out and kind of see where we're going. We need to see what his signing people are going to be like. We need to see how much he's going to be paying fighters. We have to, because ultimately, a lot of the guys that he got to sign in the U.S., he had to massively overpay them in order to get them to sign. And for many of those guys, he didn't recoup any of the amount of value off of it. Like I said before, they were at risk of going under. So what happens in the UK is going to be interesting. I think he should be a lot more conservative with how he approaches it. But Joshua, of course, being off the table, I don't think that was Hearn trying to keep Joshua off the table. I think that was Joshua wanting to be off the table. Because if you were to lock him in, he would have to fight on DAZN, and the amount of money that he has to pay Joshua, it would put a massive dent in what Joshua and him can make outside of it. So I think it was more Joshua than him to keep them off the table. And he put Dillian White off the table. And I'm just like, why would you put Dillian White off the table? He ain't shit. But anyway, but he's going to put Joshua off the table. So I expect Sky Sports to obviously try to outbid DAZN to keep Joshua from fighting on the platform. We'll see what happens personally. But, that's something that, other, news has done. When you look at a lot of Joshua's previous fights, a lot of people, and especially with Dillian White, a lot of people thought Joshua and Dillian White were just going to automatically fight on DAZN here in the U.S. And for a lot of the times, you saw people bid on those fights because that was what was going to happen. But when it comes to the UK, Sky Sports is going to be very aggressive in trying to get Joshua to fight. So we'll see what happens here. But that's ultimately what I have for you guys on episode 2. If you guys have any questions, any concerns, please leave them in the comment section. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, and of course, follow the other brothers in the Lion's Den boxing community. And I'll be back with another one.